want to hear from Paige Walley, who had, in some ways, the advantage in advising us of having been a legislator for 10 years, in addition to having run agency departments in both Tennessee and Alabama. And so we would really invite you to help us understand what to expect of our leadership and how to support our leadership in child welfare reform.
Thank you, Pat. I just can't sit in that seat anymore. I'm sorry. I got to keep sliding out of it and trying to maintain my composure. I knew I couldn't speak and balance at the same time. How many of you have seen the movie "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou"? You remember that? You remember the scene in the movie where Governor O'Daniel from Mississippi, locked in a heated re-election effort, is getting counseled by his very simple campaign manager's son, and his son says to him, "Daddy, our opponent is just whipping our tail. He's out there talking about this reform. We got to get us some of this reform, Daddy." And the governor just goes off on him, of course, says, "You stupid so-and-so, we're the incumbent. We can't do any reform." I'm here to tell you that whether we're incumbents or challengers, we always are in the business of continuing to try to improve our quality of outcomes so that we don't have reform thrust on us unnecessarily. Let me take just a moment of personal privilege, too, to thank Pat and Voices for Georgia Children and everybody for putting this on. And also I need to ask some help, if I could, real quick. I know we're going to run out of time, but I've got to ask Pat this question, or Mike or John, maybe you can help me answer it. Susie and Aaron and Don have asked me to get them to their destination after the meeting, and I got to find out from you, what's the best way to get there? Do I need to take MARTA or drive my personal car? Should I take, public cab or private car to MARTA? What's the best way to get there?
Where do you want to go?
I guess for you to tell me where, how to get somewhere, I got to tell you where I'm trying to get to. Isn't that interesting? And which just happens to be the airport, which is really just an interim destination for home, which is where we're all trying to get to. Home. And as I was thinking about that, that's exactly the condition I think Georgia finds yourself in right now. Also ourselves. My mother's from Georgia. I live just over the state line in Auburn, Alabama. Any cheers? But I asked that. I want us to pause really for a second and ask that question. Are we spending more time talking about how to get somewhere than we are where we want to get to? How are we going to know when we arrive? What are the interim steps along the way that I'm going to know at least I'm on the right track? Asking those tough questions about who we want to be and where we want to get to before we decide how to get there. I think that's something that's important. And we might be overlooking that where question. And why do we value what we value? What are the values that are going in all this? I've heard references to some very important values, but the role that I think I'm going to put myself for just a moment, pretending I'm talking to some of the legislators in the crowd, that you're going to actually take this message to your legislators on behalf of this conversation. But values like children need permanent homes urgently, and adults who are going to be invested in their well-being. That children need to feel safe and should remain in their homes whenever safely possible and not be traumatized by being removed unless that's the last resort. Values like parents should receive services and families be engaged to improve safety and parental functioning. That these aren't bad families. And we're not in the business of rescuing kids, because if we are, Georgia, Alabama, all of us are lousy at it. If we think that's the way to have healthy, forever families and kids that have a chance at really remarkable well-being. values like any out-of-home removal should be for an intervention, not a placement. Does that make sense? That these children are being removed to get something done for them, not just to change addresses. That taxpayer stewardship, this is the one I usually connect with legislators on, right? Taxpayer stewardship is important. And when we start looking at evidence-based practices and looking at what's best for children and families, this is a wonderful issue when we talk about doing this work, because what's best for children and families? Prevention, permanency, well-being. It also happens to be best for Georgia taxpayers. And we can talk about that more another time. The field of child welfare is really moving decisions. But I'm going to tell you this, I was the House sponsor in Tennessee back in the mid-1990s that actually created the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. Up to that time, all services for children were separated, segregated in a variety of disparate departments. Education, juvenile justice, human services, mental health. And the left hand didn't know what the right was doing. We consolidated. Thought that did something, just the fact that we got everybody together. But guess what? We just kind of consolidated still some dysfunction. Now, so we recognized that finally that, you know what? We legislators were co-conspirators in the poor performance in our child welfare system. It wasn't Commissioner Horton's fault. It was our fault. And so I was in the minority party, but our Speaker of the House asked me to chair the House Committee on Child Welfare Reform. And so I had the chance to do that. And we were able to bring in some really great thinkers. At that time, someone from the Child Welfare League of America came in and helped us look very, very methodically and dispassionately about what were best practices out there, what did we need to do to change, what infrastructure needed to be altered, what investment did we have to pony up and stop avoiding, and realize that we're going to have to invest more dollars if we want better outcomes, if we want to decrease caseloads, if we want to increase numbers of supervisors, if we want to decrease supervisor to caseworker ratio. That costs money, and you can't do it on flat budgets. It can't be done. That's why Don Winstead, I think, made a great point in Florida. It was serendipitous that they had this privatization, but they had the 4E waiver that allowed them greater flexibility to spend their resources on front-end prevention services. We were able to put together an improvement package because we listened to some experts. We listened to the gentleman that was going to be the first commissioner. But I regret one group we didn't listen to were families and youth. We just figured that, we didn't listen. And in hindsight, I would sure do that again. I would rectify that mistake. That's something that we in the legislature can do, is to mandate participation of families in decision-making, of hearing from youth. But we were able to really, I think, do some things that listen to providers too. Let me point that out. And we had one really significant provider. They're one of the sponsors of our program here, as a matter of fact, that we're in Tennessee, that said, if you will let us be creative, if you will free us up, we'll take the money you're giving us and we will show you how we can go into homes and prevent the numbers of removals. And by doing that, we can stabilize those families, have better outcomes for those families, rather than having to remove those families, place them in more expensive, longer-term out-of-home care unnecessarily, where they can be kept safe. If you'll give us the flexibility to do that, we will guarantee you we can do it, and we won't ask you for another dollar, and we'll show you the outcomes. And they did it. They proved it. We listened to them. So that when I became commissioner in Georgia, we got them down to help folks listen again about how we could do this kind of work. So we listen. We as and I want to tell you something about Alabama, because I'm proud of what was done there with I know a lot of times folks on this side of the Chattahoochee River kind of look differently at folks on that side of the Chattahoochee River. Let me tell you, you want to see a child welfare system that works, go over there and look at the outcomes. The best safety numbers in the nation as far as absence of repeat maltreatment. Lynn happens to lead the work for Casey there as well as partner here. Got out of the consent decree too, one of only a couple of states to ever do it. But that aside, we had folks that decided, you know what, let's come up, if we have an opportunity as legislators to help put values into our statute and into our rule and write in what's going to be helpful. And you know, I won't go into all of it, but safety and permanency outcomes and expectations and legal structure related to the caseload standards, requirements for caseworkers, supervisory standards, and we've got it put in legislation, wrote it out because you know what? We didn't want to let legislators like me off the hook for funding it when budgets got tight. You had to come up with it. So, you know, I guess I would just, in the interest of time, I'll stop so that we can get to your most important questions. But there are opportunities for legislators to really take the lead in embedding these values that we talked about. But that's after these community conversations about where do we want to go. Not first, how do we get there? It's just like my question, asking you all, how do I get to somewhere you don't know where I'm going? Where do we want to go? How do we know we will get there? And what are the steps on the way? And we can hold each one of us accountable for progress toward that destination. I've got an OnStar on my vehicles to tell me how to get out of here and get back to the airport and then get on to Auburn. You've got that capability too. You've got remarkable resources right here that you talk to your legislators about where we want to go as a system and have those conversations and nail that down first. And then build on them. And therefore, what's the best mechanism that will get us there? Is it MARTA? Is it the CAM? Is it public? Is it private? What's the balance? And how does it work? So, thank you all for letting us have this just very good conversation.